much. So hello, my name is Vivian Band, and this is a talk about what have I been doing for the past 6 years of a PhD on IPv6. So I am sort of a PhD student at the University of Glasgow. I've handed the thesis in, so you're in that kind of awkward waiting period where you're not a student, but you've not graduated. Anyway, so I was running scans of the IPv6 internet to learn more about it. I'm now on the other side of the fence for my job, where I watch other people running scans of the internet to learn about what threat actors are doing over at Lipovis. So we have a vendor stall out in the hallway. Come and speak to us. We'd like to talk to you about sort of deception and what's happening out on the internet and how we characterize it and try and make sense of the noise out there. So, talk outline. 6 weeks ago, I submitted the PhD thesis. It's a little bit hard to see on the projector, but on the recording it should be a bit more clear. This is the title page of my thesis. Strategies for scanning the IPv6 space. So I actually started the PhD in late 2019, October 2019, and a lot happened along the way. COVID happened. A lot of cost of living stuff happened, which had a knock-on impact on like funding and stuff for conferences. And I also started part-time industry work as a result of this. So I was a SOC analyst and then a threat hunter part-time alongside the PhD at an MSSP. And that was fascinating, like first-hand experience about how the research I'm doing in the PhD can be applied to industry immediately to go and look into what threat actors are doing. Loads of interesting applications, and we'll go through some of those in this talk. So the sections that we'll be going into, internet measurement. And this is the field that my PhD is officially in, is I work as an internet measurement researcher. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is. It's not massively well known, but it's well worth your time to get into details with. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Scanning the IPv6 internet. So what was my PhD actually doing? I can talk to you about the foundations of where we started from, and then go from there. So how I run the scans and why are you running them? Something for Blue Team to take away. So I was firmly on Blue Team in my industry roles. Botnet detection using IPv6. So something I found out as a consequence of doing this PhD research is we can actually find this to identify botnets from one sign-in attempt will reveal massive amounts of activity in your logs. Really interesting. Red Team I'm less familiar with, admittedly. But I have picked up on, essentially IPv6 seems to be kind of a hidden door that most people don't really attempt. It's still open in a surprising number of cases. So I can give a little bit of high-level advice about why it's worth trying IPv6 when IPv4 fails, and it's worth investing the time in learning this, even if you're on the red team side of it. So internet measurement. The internet is a massive, complicated, living ecosystem at this point, and I use the word ecosystem deliberately. Like, you often see people say that the internet is an experiment that escaped from the lab. Like, it started as a defense project, it's now a cornerstone of everyday life, economics, everything is connected to this. It's how we speak to each other at scale. It's far, far too complex for any one person to understand. Like, say, for example, even someone says, I understand DNS, right? There's so many subsections to this. It's like, I'll find out an answer to one question and come out with 5 more. So you've got many different people studying many different, very specific subsections of the internet to try and understand it. And the reason, the diagram that I've included here, again, the projector's not really doing it justice, but BGP was originally designed on 2 napkins at an ITF meeting. It was scribbled down rough notes. We've come a long way from when you could just describe a protocol on 1 napkin. We've now got entire libraries dedicated to all these protocols that are running on the modern day internet, written by hundreds of people. And the people that actually write the internet are these people. So this is an IETF meeting, so the Internet Engineering Task Force. 3 times a year, these people meet and discuss how do we make the internet better, how do we help it run, and standardize the protocols. So you've heard of like RFC number, whatever, 1,000 or whatever. This is where the RFCs get written and discussed. So the internet measurement starts with measuring technical data on the network. So say, for example, in my case, I was sending pings and recording the responses to those. It starts with technical information like that, but it very often crosses over with other fields of study. Because you need to try and figure out the dynamics of this data. Like, this is the measurements we're getting. Why are we getting this measurements? Because ultimately, the internet is a communication tool for humans, created by humans like this. And we need to take this into account to figure out the dynamics behind the data. So an example of this, an internet measurement paper that had a big impact on me. When I started in October 2019, the first conference I went to was the Internet Measurement Conference in Amsterdam. And I saw a talk where someone from the RAC Cambridge at the time, they're at Strathclyde University now, And they were part of the Cambridge Cybercrime Research Centre, where it was computing scientists measuring DDoS for hire services. You know, here's the traffic, here's what sort of stuff we see on the network. And they worked with criminologists to identify who's actually using these services, what sort of interventions work. And the way they were talking about it, they would talk so enthusiastically in their talk, it was kind of like just them having a conversation with each other. It was two people presenting and going, oh yeah, do you remember when we found this thing? And one of their big conclusions from this, weirdly enough, is that Google Adverts actually stops people using DDoS for hire services. Literally. If you search DDoS for hire, apparently putting up a notice that says, this is illegal, don't do this, you could be charged, it stops so many people using this and causes a noticeable decrease. Absolutely mad paper, worth a read. And it's that sort of thing that's a problem with working in threat intel sometimes, is it seemed to be mostly sort of like angry people wanting to kick people off in games because they're losing. I have this in Dota far too often, it still affects like a surprising amount of games. And the problem is when you explain to people about this all started in Minecraft, like Mirai or something, it's true. It's not marketable as much as sort of, you know, ransomware groups or APTs or whatever. But this is exactly why we have these sorts of papers. They can say, here's our analysis, here's where we think it started. And that's fascinating, like the human side of the internet. Shameless self-promotion from me. So this is a paper that I am presenting at Internet Measurement Conference in 2 months, in October 2026. It's to do with, in some bits of the IPv6 internet, you can't reach other sides of the IPv6 internet. So say, for example, I can't remember which way around it goes, but there's, if you're on, I think it's Cogent, you have a Cogent IPv6 address from Cogent platform. You cannot access OpenStreetMap, which is hosted on Hurricane Electric, because Cogent and Hurricane Electric do not peer with each other. And again, this is caused by economics and profit margins, and you know, a little bit of politics behind it as well. So when writing this paper, we had to do a little bit of like looking into the economics of this. Like, okay, they're not speaking to each other and sharing their technical information. Why is that? And it turns out it was just profit margins. So again, something that you think would be a sort of just exclusively technical paper, very human side of it. You end up learning about all sorts of things. So there's 3 conferences that are known for internet measurement research papers. The conveniently titled Internet Measurement Conference, IMC. If you type in IMC into Google, by the way, it comes up with International Medieval Conference, and I think that sounds amazing. I want to go to that. And I will do one day. TMA, Traffic Measurement and Analysis, and PAM, Passive and Active Measurement. They will charge a fee to attend. It's mostly academics being paid for by either institutions or companies funding employees to go. These happen yearly, and the full papers are peer-reviewed scientific research papers, and they're completely free to read online. I would highly recommend taking a look at lists of the topics that are available. Like, there's everything from smishing analysis to like how to make video work during big events and things like this. It's worth even just having a skim of the abstract and the conclusions, just to figure out what people are talking about and what's out there, because it might come back later about, oh, I remember something about this. A paper about honeypot stuff, for example, was at last IMC. So internet measurement studies generally fall into one of 2 categories. Active measurement, where you're sending out traffic to try and prompt a response from some other network. And passive measurement, where you kind of observe incoming traffic, or you use existing data sets other people have gathered, not initiating network connections. Or they call it not introducing new traffic to the network, but sometimes you respond to, I don't think that's strictly accurate. So anyway, if you're kind of observing stuff, it's passive. So my PhD, which we'll go on to next, used active measurement techniques. I was actively running scans and sending traffic out into the internet. So IPv6 scanning. Most PhDs start with a kind of lightning bolt question. If left in year 1 to sort of, if you're on a government-funded PhD, which mine was from EPSRC, your first year is essentially go and read a load of papers and find out what's interesting. Complete freedom. And I had a sort of like idea about would botnets survive in an IPv6 only internet? Because I was reading about security papers. I'd gone to that conference and heard about the botnet DDoS for hire stuff, and I thought, that's really interesting. I want to find out more about botnets. And I saw more people talking about IPv6, and I hadn't done any research into it previously to that. And I thought, well, everyone's going on about you can't scan this, it's too big. Botnets seem to be using sort of like scans of the v4 internet. Would they be able to do that in v6? So the number of possible IPv4 addresses you've got, 2 bits, it can be a 1 or a 0, so 2 possibilities, 32 of those bits in an IPv4 address. You've got about 4.3 billion possible addresses to scan. And you can do that in about an hour. Like, that's quite well documented in several papers. Number of possible IPv6 addresses, 2 to the power of 128. Unpronounceably large number of addresses. If you try to scan that, it's 79 billion times as big as the v4 internet. You cannot scan this at all. So unlike in v4, a botnet could not scan the entire v6 space looking for new hosts opportunistically. You can, however, select subsections of the IPv6 space and scan those. It's challenging, but still possible to do. So a v6 address consists of two halves, network prefix and interface identifier. So your network prefix, generally, if you have a v6 enabled router, so say, for example, Sky will do this, I think HyperOptic does as well, your router will have the same sort of first 64-bit value on all of the addresses coming from your network. The interface identifier is host-specific and will usually change with each new reconnection. These are assigned in separate stages using different allocation strategies. So that means effectively these are two smaller search spaces already that we can run scans for separately. There's absolutely no point in trying to look for hosts, so interface identifiers, on a network prefix that does not exist. So we can look for network prefixes first. So RIPE-NCC, who sort of governs the IP address resource, ASN resources for Europe and some of the Middle East, does a load of fantastic resources for like internet measurement and monitoring these sorts of things. And one of those is the Routing Information Service, RIS, which offers free historic and current data sets all the way back to, I think it's like 1999 in some cases, of what the internet looked like at the time. So BGP advertisements are effectively the routes on the internet. How does my traffic get around this? What does the map of the internet look like? RIPE will offer you that for free. You can go and take a look through them. So we can use these advertisements to reduce the search space we need to scan for live potential networks. So anyone, I apologize for subnetting creeping into this. If you have a /48, that means that the first 48 bits of this are known. So we know that any address we scan in this network is always going to start with 2001 DB8 AAAAA. They're set. We don't need to scan through those. So each block in between the colon characters in a v6 address is 16 bits. So we know 48 bits already. We don't know these last 16. But if we combine them, that means we've got a full network prefix we can start scanning for hosts. So effectively, if we have a full 64-bit network prefix, that means that like I've identified a router on the v6 internet I can ping and start looking for hosts behind it. So this is a graph from the PhD. 48 is by far the most commonly seen advertisement. So this is the number of BGP advertisements and how long the prefix was. 48 by far the most common, so it makes sense. It's the smallest space that we have to scan and the most common, so we'll select those. 2 to the power of 16 is about 65,000-ish possible network prefixes per /48. So if we send one ping to each one of those possible 65,000-ish network prefixes per second, that's only about 18 hours actually that will take at a very slow rate of scanning to figure out how many live networks are within this advertisement. So effectively, how many possible routers, to simplify it a little bit, can we find within this advertisement? I can tell you in 18 hours. If we tried to scan all of the 64 bits in this network prefix, by contrast, if we didn't use this advertisement, that would take 42 times the age of the known universe. Ridiculous. Like, there's so many big numbers like this in the thesis I've used for comparison. So why am I using ping for these scans? You can use any traffic you like for active scanning. I went with ping just because it's relatively simple, and the different responses we get tell us different things about, what is. It's almost kind of like battleships. Like, you've had a partial success, complete success, or complete failure. So if you get like no route or something, or for network prohibited, for example, that's a sign about it's not live or just back off. So that's not useful to us. We've not found anything useful if we get those responses. If we get a response that's a live network prefix, so it's like the first 64-bit network prefix is live, but we've not found a host behind that. So we've found the router, but not a device behind it. Destination unreachable will tell you that about this router exists. Device doesn't, and that's okay. That's a starting point. For this scan where we're trying to establish what networks are live, that's fine. That's usable for us. If you get really lucky, and probably lucky, and you should have bought a lottery ticket, you might get a full live IPv6 address. You found a live network prefix and a device using this interface ID. There are some interesting networks. It seems to be content delivery networks will use something called aliasing, where they'll just go echo reply to everything. Like, yeah, they're using this address, and this address, and this address. Like, anything you ping in this server will go, yeah, sure, I know them. No, you don't. But they do that as a defensive measure, so you can't see exactly which hosts are behind it. They just reply to everything, which is kind of the same as replying to nothing in some ways. So this was a graph from the PhD. So what we did was a reachability scan. So we scanned, I think it was like 2,000 of these at a time in parallel. And we scanned like several addresses just to make sure we hadn't accidentally contacted the endpoint and so on. So effectively, this was the PhD scans that we ran. We ran 3 rounds of them, so that would be round 1, 2, 3. And you'll see these are categories at the bottom. So what we had to do when we initially ran these scans of 2,000 randomly selected advertisements, we got really different results each time. They weren't representative. So what we did was went on to PeeringDB, which is kind of a voluntary database where network operators can sign up and say, yeah, this is like what my network is like. Here's my peering policy. Here's what type of network I am. And people are surprisingly honest on sort of self-supplied information. Again, it comes back to characterizing the human side of the internet. The least worst option we have is a volunteer-provided service. And they do that for business operational reasons about, here's other people that we can peer with, do business with as a network operator. And it turns out people are surprisingly honest. There's a few papers that back this up. So we use this as a proxy about when people tell you what type of network they are, there's a category for that. That was what we used to sort of stratify and use it, almost kind of like population sampling to run our scans. So we scanned 2,000 of these at a time and had proportional numbers of, we didn't have many nonprofits because there just aren't many of those there. Unknown, I was very surprised, was consistent between them. And I am part of the problem. You don't need to sign up to PeeringDB to run an IPv6 range. I have an ASN, I have an IPv6 range. I've not signed up to PeeringDB. So I may well be in this data set of unknowns. No one declaring what they want. And I'm a hobbyist network, so I think quite a lot of it is like that. So we found a live network prefix through one of these scans. And we found, I'd say it was maybe about 15% of the stuff that we scanned came back as live responsive, and that's actually not bad considering you're doing this from very basic information. So we found one of these. How are you going to find hosts behind that search space, behind this router? So how would we find the IPv6 addresses of hosts on that network, like the full address with both half combined? We would need to find valid interface identifiers. So most modern operating systems assign IPv6 interface identifiers, like the host unique bit, as randomized 64-bit values, so no detectable pattern in here. Again, you remember previously we said 64-bit search spaces would take 42 times the lifetime of the known universe to search through. This value changes every time the device reconnects to the network or after a day. You have no chance of guessing this at all, so it's a really effective privacy measure for stopping this type of IPv6 scan does not work if you use privacy addresses, kills it dead. However, there is, back when IPv6 was first introduced, there was an addressing scheme in 1996 or so that embedded the network interface's MAC address into its public IPv6 address. And this was understandably deprecated in 2001 due to being a privacy risk. But there are multiple papers showing that this is in use in the modern internet today. People are still using this. And this paper is worth a read. The one bad apple can spoil your IPv6 privacy is horrifying. So that one is the one that's, I think it's the one that says that IPv6 devices that even if you have a router that embeds its MAC address into its public v6 address, that can be used to track you across multiple different networks and ISPs. Even if all of your other devices use privacy addresses, your router, goes through prefix allocation, rotates its prefixes, you can still be tracked across networks. It also immediately identifies which network interface hardware is being used in a public v6 address because there's a register openly of this is the organizational unique identifier, which we'll get onto in a minute. The IEEE has a list of this. If you look at that and say oh, it's this company maintaining this, okay, that maybe gives you an idea of some exploits you could use against this or what sort of stack's being used. So the MAC address derived v6 addressing scheme assigns the identifiers in sort of 3 components. So you've got the modified organizational unique identifier. And the reason I say this is there's one bit that gets flipped to mark it as being universal scope, not local. So there's a little bit of modification needed there. It's one bit that gets flipped. So 24 bits in total for that. A constant value of FFFE is inserted as padding because MAC addresses are 48 bits. This is just to expand it a little bit. So that's the same for all addresses allocated using this EUI 64 scheme. And then the last bit of it is the host specific value, so 24 bits. There's a public record of organizational unique identifiers that I mentioned earlier on the IEEE website. So it's literally just standards.oui.ieee.org, not secret. And that'll give you information of, I think it's 32,000 allocations. It'll show you the hex value of this and the company that registered it. So there's a very interesting project I recommend taking a look at as well. There was a paper, IPv6 hit list at scale, be careful what you wish for, which ominous title, very scary paper. We can also see which OUIs have been seen in like live public IPv6 addresses in the wild, transmitting traffic, through the IPv6 Observatory project, which was set up by this paper. The researchers have done this. So these addresses, what they did was set up like a fleet of NTP, like network time protocol servers, and a load of devices phoned out to that with their v6 addresses, and you could see embedded MAC address information in those. So obviously, for privacy reasons, they only give out redacted forms of this data, but one of the data sets that they offer is which OUIs have been seen, so which manufacturer codes am I seeing. So using this information, the IEEE list and the v6 observatory, we can see OUIs that are known to be in use in the wild. You know, we've seen traffic from them, and what hardware they might be used in. So we've got 24-bit OUI that we've seen from these. The 16-bit constant, FFFE, it's 40 bits that we already know. So we've only got 24 bits left to search for a 64-bit identifier. That's doable. So it's about 16.7 million possible host-specific values to iterate through. Perfectly doable. Instead of, you know, the lifetime of the universe figure that we had. If we scan at 10 attempts per second, that'll take you about 19 days to go through. Yeah, okay, we can do that. So challenges of running IPv6 scans. These were the sort of foundations that I used for the initial starting point of running the PhD scans. All of these scans required sending a lot of ICMPv6 echo request packets, even in sort of the basic reachability cases. The total bandwidth used is tiny. Like, ICMP packets are not big. The main problem is that each of these packets were sent to different addresses. So you need to be mindful of overflowing firewall state tables and rate limiting at network, like recipient networks. If they start seeing, like, you know, somebody probing multiple addresses, they might start cutting you off and say, like, this is really suspicious, so I'm not going to let you keep doing this. Finding the infrastructure to actually run these scans from is really difficult, and one of the main holdups and blockers we had in this project. So many cloud hosting platforms, like I looked into several of them that like offered v6, and they weren't suitable for sort of different reasons. Either they would like artificially slow the send rate. So, you know, I think it was, I'm not going to name them here, but there was one platform where on the university network I could send like 2,000 packets per second to different addresses per second. That one would limit me to like 100 for some reason, and it was an optimization somewhere in their infrastructure that we had no insight into. Understandably, quite a lot of hosting platforms, it's against their terms of service. Yeah, fair enough. You know, we're doing this for ethical reasons. It's difficult to distinguish that without prior contact. Optimizations breaking scan traffic. So there was one where we tried running scans from, and it kept doing network address translation on public v6 addresses, which just broke so much stuff to do with checksums and things, and meant that we couldn't use them for measurement. The stuff we were getting back wasn't accurate. So I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you so much to the IT staff for putting up with many of my support tickets, and possibly overflowing the state table once, sorry. For supporting this PhD work over the past 6 and a bit years. They're excellent. So part of supporting this work, the original paper, or a paper that gets really heavily cited in internet measurement studies, is ZMAP paper. So it's fast internet-wide scanning and its security applications, like really well-known tool used for measurement studies. There's a v6 variant being developed as well. This was a v4 paper originally. There's a section called Good Internet Citizenship, which is sort of this set of 7 rules, guidelines, you know, strongly advised practices. If you're an ethical researcher running academic running scans for academic and research purposes, ideally you should be doing these 7 recommended practices. And we obeyed those. You know, we spoke to our IT team. We didn't just start running it without notice. We notified our IT team about this is what we want to do. Here's the precautions we've thought about. You know, here's how we try and randomize and spread our traffic out to avoid creating disruption at the recipient networks. And we also had a web page, a reverse DNS record set up. If people receive scan traffic from us, they could go to our web page where we would explicitly say, hello, you know, this is why we're running. If you've seen traffic from this address, we're running this study. Email me here and I'll exclude you within 24 hours, no reason needed. You know, if people don't want to be scanned, absolutely fine. Interestingly, I didn't receive a single email about this the entire time I was running this study. And that's a really, really common theme in internet research papers of this nature. V6 papers almost never receive contact about this. V4 sometimes does, and that can range from people being really supportive, saying, hey, I think something on your network's been popped, you should look into this. to curiosity, people just curious, like, what are you doing? This is really interesting. Can we get some information about this? To really, really hostile. V6 papers don't really seem to get any sort of contact, and I wonder if that's because people aren't really monitoring it. It's interesting. So the IPv6 scans I ran over the course of the PhD used the address space reduction techniques I've described in these slides as a sort of like base, simple case. We developed these to run stuff like rate limiting detection, so how fast can you scan for interface identifiers, for example. How to detect how many packets can I send per second, and is it feasible to scan this at scale? And how do I scan multiple, at what rate do I scan multiple of these routers over a /48 that we've seen, for example? So say my ISP allocates me a /56. That means I only need to scan 1 in 256 routers instead of all of them. Just a lot of optimizations like this that we still need to work on. And stratification by AS type and so on. So there wasn't enough sort of time to discuss it all here in great detail, but I am absolutely very happy to discuss this. If anyone wants to talk about it at the conference, online, so on afterwards, please come and say hi. So scanning the V6 internet is challenging, but it is entirely possible to scan relevant subsections of it. There definitely, when I started the PhD, there was this kind of impression that it was impossible to scan IPv6, so don't bother securing it. That's becoming increasingly less true. There's a lot of people doing interesting internet research, internet measurement research in IPv6. And it's good to sort of just keep a little bit of an eye on this about what network, what sort of risks might be posed to your network, what have researchers found. So insecure practices like lack of rate limiting would have stopped me being able to run these scans, and not embedding MAC addresses in public IPv6 addresses. If you use privacy addresses, I can't scan that. If you use embedded MAC addresses, I can. So it's all about kind of knowing what best practice is to best secure your users' privacy and also fend off attacks like this. So that's great. This is the academic research side of it. This is sort of stuff that I've kind of reflected on while I've been working in industry about how does this apply to blue teamers and red teamers. So I found out you can actually use this to detect botnets lurking in your telemetry as a blue teamer. So you remember the V6 internet stuff about embedded MAC addresses? These tend to be used by sort of router, there's a few papers detailing this about, they tend to be used by routers and IoT devices with limited hardware resources and custom network stacks. They don't have the means to kind of roll randomized IPv6 addresses reliably because randomization is surprisingly difficult and so on. If you try searching your sign-in logs for IPv6 addresses containing FFFE, if it's in the middle of the last half of the V6 address, that's probably an IPv6 address containing this MAC address embedded stuff, right? This could indicate a sign-in attempt from a compromised router or IoT device that's part of a botnet. So it's possible this could occur elsewhere in the address, but the chances are relatively low given randomization and the sheer space of the thing. It's reasonably high signal to noise, just searching for FFFE. So there is a little bit of noise introduced from, there is an operator in Finland I kept seeing this from, weirdly enough, from network operators that choose to randomize MAC addresses and take that privacy step, but also decide to embed that MAC address in the V6 address for some reason. So it's like you've done one privacy measure, but not the other. That's very strange to me. So you can convert the OUIs in the addresses containing FFFE back to local scope OUIs. I think like Scapy has a capability of doing this. You can roll it yourself. But honestly, I would make life easier for yourself. And you can just look at addresses containing FFFE string from networks that aren't often seen in your sign-in logs. Because if you've got someone signing in from a sort of benign operator that keeps doing this, you're probably going to see them quite often. If you're seeing something a bit more anomalous, okay, an operator we don't see often, go and check that. So what you do if you find an IPv6 address that has this MAC address allocation scheme, run a search for the user agent that gets returned. Even one sign-in attempt from a compromised router or IoT device can expose tens or even hundreds, in one case thousands I saw, IPv4 and IPv6 addresses attempting similar sign-ins, targeting similar applications, very similar user agents. And this works even if the sign-in attempt failed. It just needs that device to try and contact the network to expose, like, hey, there's this entire botnet trying stuff here. And it's like finding hundreds of needles in this haystack at once from addresses all around the world, compromised routers all over the place. So this is not showing up at all. Please go and look this up on YouTube later, but essentially it's a KQL query about check your sign-in logs, where the IP address contains FFFE, and then go and look at the user agent, IP, UP, the usual stuff you would look for in this. but make sure to include the user agent and autonomous system number and the application targeted. So red team is a little bit more high level because I don't work in red team, but I have noticed that IPv6 often isn't as well secured as v4. This is from speaking to people sort of in industry and also through academic papers. You know, there was this one, Where Have All the Firewalls Gone? Very interesting paper that details about switching to IPv6 has kind of unintentionally removed a few security benefits that were given by network address translation in v4. So it's all kind of like, you know, right, we've introduced this and opened up kind of a new attack surface. So I think the suggestion would be if v4 fails, try v6 address. It might work. It's worth testing if a SOC knows how to handle IPv6 IOCs securely. So say, for example, if they start blocking privacy addresses that rotate with each new connection or rotate daily, okay, that IOC is not really that useful. If you as a red teamer can easily, you know, unplug your Ethernet cable and plug it back in, and suddenly you've got a new v6 address, can you still get away with that? If it's worth checking if alerts fire for v6 as well as v4. You know, if conditional access policies work for v6 also. It was part of the work I was doing with detections was kind of like, okay, this has really nice logic for IPv4. Here's how we can use it for v6 also. So just a little bit of time learning about how like prefixes and allocations work. Even if you just learn like this is what a network prefix looks like. If I see a malicious one of these, I can start trying to block this instead of individual IPs. That would help a lot. Slightly more esoteric, IPv6 headers also have a few fields, I think it was like flow label, that are very small, but you could potentially use this for data exfiltration. There's not going to be many detections to catch this. Summary. 4 main things to take away from this talk. Internet measurement helps categorize the technical and also the human behaviors of the world's largest network. Many, many interesting papers available for free. Internet Measurement Conference, I would highly recommend starting on that. Happens yearly in October-ish for that one. So you can get the papers for free online on the site. IPv6 scanning is challenging, but recon and measurement of IPv6 is entirely possible. You know, it's not that this is impossible to scan because it's too big. You can scan meaningful sections of it. So say the PhD work I was focusing on was, can you scan certain types of IoT device? Yeah, if you have the resources, you absolutely can. Blue team can use IPv6 to find botnets and get more insight into threat actor behaviors. It's interesting that you can kind of fingerprint like slightly untrustworthy network providers based on how they allocate and use IPv6 addresses in attacks. You tend to build up sort of like characteristics of them. Red team can sometimes use IPv6 to sneak past defenses that only cover IPv4. It's worth a shot, worth securing. And that's everything. So thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. Are you doing this for me?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. Hello.
This is scanning on a relatively small scale. A lot of what we know about the IPv4 internet is kind of aggregate,
Yeah.
passive. So things like war driving will tell us like SSIDs and things.
I've not told you about the chapter about Wiggle in mine. Yeah, it's awesome.
Is there an equivalent to that for IPv6?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of aggregate and like every go.
Yeah, yeah. Tons of services. So the main ones would be like IPv6 Observatory is an interesting variant of this. There's also IPv6 Hit List, which was kind of the original collection of here's loads of different sort of target generation algorithms, stuff we've observed, you know, interesting techniques you can use to ping. So it's kind of about as close as you would get to war driving, I suppose. It's like, you know, community of academics and industry researchers contribute to the v6 hit list. I can show you after and see if that kind of answers it. If not, I'll probably know about something else. Thank you. Yes?
You showed that many devices that are botneted suffering from botnet.
I'm going to start using that, yeah.
They use the MAC address in the IPv6 address.
Correct.
How much percentage of the worldwide internet is using it?
Now you're asking. There's probably a paper detailing this, actually. I've got 2 I can recommend you if you come and see me later.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if that goes away because people get privacy focused. Do you have any ideas of what else could we find in terms of indicators?
For botnet type traffic, the old reliables about are you sort of getting a high number of interesting signings from autonomous systems that you don't see very often. You know, say for example, like a botnet might be, a participant in a botnet might be a router in, say, I don't know, a country that you don't see very often for a perfectly legitimate ISP there. But it's the fact that it's unusual and not sort of in line with your usual expected baseline. So again, it's behavioral. Like, does this look unusual to me? The FFFE one, it's like, I really wish people would stop embedding MAC addresses into their v6 addresses. Like you say, it's not secure. But it does have this sort of like nice side effect that we can use it to track botnets. So while it's still out there, we can at least use it for this. But I'd rather it didn't, yeah. Well, yes. Thank you. Okay, I think that's about, oh, sorry, yes.
Do you dream of ASNs?
We work together, you know this. Identify them on site.
All right, let's test that then, Mike.
Go on.
Which one, who owns the ASN AS201567?
That's mine, and you know that.
How about AS59645?
No?
Pair of your ones.
Oh, that's Tobias. Yeah. I should speak to him. It's been a while. Cool. Yes?
Did you find that you had to build your own tools to make this PhD, or you?
Yes, I would not recommend it. So I talked about ZMap there, right? I decided to build my own scanner because I thought, oh, this is really overcomplicated. I'm going to keep it easy and build my own. God, no. I ended up having to use like raw sockets and stuff in C. And then building like a bootleg TCP dump to analyze these packets at scale. I had like 5 terabytes of packets to analyze and return of this. I wouldn't recommend it, but you'll learn a lot by doing it, for sure, for sure. Yes?
Have you ever gone off and did data analysis to see, for botnet and stuff, anomalies and patterns?
Just anomalies in general.
Yeah,
Yeah.
patterns and then anything that goes out of that.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I mean, speak to Lupovis, shameless self-promotion. This is kind of what we deal with. Is this kind of baseline noise of the internet type stuff? Or is this kind of something a little bit more alarming and interesting? So yeah, absolutely. It's all about kind of determining what's the baseline and what's abnormal for that baseline. Absolutely. Okay, yes?
See the complexities that you requested.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why IPv6 is slow.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, this is the thing, like, you know, I was talking about the internet's way too complex for anybody, and that includes, like, IPv6. There's so many subsections people study. You know, this is the one subsection I know about. If you ask me about sort of extension headers and all this kind of thing, I know a little bit, but not enough to give an informed answer. And you think about sort of having to write a parser for all of this kind of thing. It's a more expressive kind of data plane, and that just comes with complexities inherently. It is a good thing that we're moving to this, because, you know, it preserves user privacy a bit more, it stops things breaking with NAT and so on. But yeah, it's going to take time to adopt. So we're getting there, but I agree, absolutely. Okay, I think that's about everyone. Yes? Yes, you should do a PhD. Nailed it. No, you.
Well, that's like, any other questions for Valley? No?
Cool.
Fantastic. Round of applause.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.